Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Hey, what's happening, Rush Nation? Hope you're all well. It is Monday. We're back to our regular scheduled programming. Sorry for the curveball last week and the no video, but it was still a great podcast. I think you'll all agree with Graham Barfield. But today I got a returning guest. Stocks is still on his sabbatical. We've called in another friend, someone who was on just a few months ago, but he asked me to be on his show recently, so I didn't feel so bad when I asked him to come back. But before I introduce him, and those of you live can see it, just want to say that the FFCC drafts are now done, which is amazing. I don't know how Scott Fish does 1,920 teams, because 256 is a lot, and it's best ball, but I'm glad. The drafts were fun. A lot of people said they were fun. We got them all done in 2 weeks, which is extraordinary. I know towards the end, I definitely bullied a few people into getting those picks done, but it comes from a good place. It's a very stressful event running a large tournament like that, and it was just nice to see all those picks get done. We have raised £4,000 for charity so far this year through that and the listener leagues. And just on those notices, the listener leagues are up live. You can sign up and get a spot. There'll be a link in this podcast field as well. So make sure you sign up. We assigned half the spots. We're giving away about 180 spots in our listener leagues. I'm only going to field teams in 9 of them this year, as opposed to, I think I did 16, 17, maybe even 20 last year. So I've curbed to 9. Lee and Rich are going to do the other 6. 15 listener leagues. There is a prize for each one. All details on the website. Go hit the link. But I've delayed our guest long enough. He is former champ, and I'm doing this because I'm using it as incentive for him to get back his crown. Former rankings king at Fantasy Pros. He is the lead analyst for The Score. He's a very good friend of mine. Justin Boone, welcome back. How are you, friend?
Hey, I'm doing great. I love that you threw that dig in there, just knife right in the heart. That Pat Fitzmaurice, who I had on my show last week, actually.
Yeah, you did.
Love Pat. I even said on my show last year that if anybody was going to win the contest, if I couldn't get the repeat, that he was the one I'd be willing to let do it, and he ended up coming through. So Pat is fantastic, and he edged above me again. Fantasy Pros just released their multi-year draft accuracy, so for the last 3 seasons combined, and Pat took home the gold there. I ended up in bronze, and I've been kind of plugging at Fantasy Pros going, let's get the multi-year in-season one going, because I'm pretty sure I might get the gold on that one, but we'll see if they actually put that out. But no, it's all fun. I mean, there's so many people up near the top there that are just fantastic rankers, not just myself, not just Pat. There's a lot, and it's a great time of year that now we're finally able to not just take like all those off-season thoughts we had about our rankings. Now we're actually seeing some things on the field, getting some actual news, some concrete things that we can start to change the rankings around, as opposed to just all off-season when we're kind of a little more in the numbers and that stuff. And now we're getting some actual real stuff to go on. So it's great. And I mean, hey, we got to say too off the top, like, well done with raising the money, all you're doing with the those FFCC, those are fantastic. I'm in one myself, and just hats off to you. And obviously Scott Fish and the work he does with that stuff's great, but it's awesome to see other people in the industry stepping up. So congrats on that.
Thanks. Well, appreciate that. And it was something that we said we wanted to do. We've done it for 3 years, the FFCC. We've always done charities. We always said, look, we'll just people donate to their own charity, right? And this year we wanted to pick a cause that was really important to us. So we picked Unique, which is there in the fight against rare chromosome disease, especially in children. And one of our writers, actually, his children both have that. So it was a cause very close to us. And we were bouncing some ideas off in December last year, and he was like, do you mind if I put this forward? I went, that's done. Like, that's it. We don't need to think about this anymore. So hopefully we can make it a real difference. And that's what we want to do, because we get to do a lot of cool stuff for fun. And it's like, we can all just put a couple of pounds and a couple of dollars into our pockets and just donate. And if we all get together, we can do something incredible. Scott Fish has talked about it for years. So happy to do it. And there's so many more that are doing great work as well.
And Scott Fish does a great job telling everybody too, like it doesn't have to be like a big charity thing like this. It could be in every league, right? If you take one of the entry fees from your league and put that to charity, right? If every league did that, that's another huge sum of money. So that's something I always recommend. I know when people message me on Twitter, if they ever want to, give me a little something for helping out and helping them win fantasy titles, I always say just, find the charity you like and give to them. I know for me, you said things that hit close to home. Alzheimer's is one in my family that we've had to deal with. So I know when I play in a few of the charity leagues, like the Data Force Charity League, I'm playing for that cause. But yeah, really, to try to turn something that is fun, is about bragging rights, beating your coworkers, beating your friends. But if you can also do something good along the way, why not?
Absolutely. And on the Fantasy Pros contest, they let me in it this year. So I'll be propping up near the bottom, but it's just getting used to the format, isn't it? I did rankings on there last year and they were good enough to get me into the contest. So I'm looking forward to watching you guys excel at the top, and I'll be the guy at the end with the baton, sort of bringing up the rear. But it's a process, isn't it? Every year you get a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. So
yeah, I've had a few people asking me, about what it is every year that kind of allows us to be near the top. The few people who seem to be up there, and I know Kyle Yates, who works for Fantasy Pros, actually joked on Twitter that the guys at the top must have the system figured out or something. And Pat and I were talking, and we're like, no, we do not have it figured out. I was like, I've definitely tried, and I've definitely gone and looked at it over, especially after I have a bad week or something. And then you jump on there and just scam through it. Okay, come on, there's got to be another angle I'm missing or something. And I don't know, they changed the rankings format a couple of years ago too. So it's it's very fun. And it's awesome that you're in it. I wish everybody in the industry could be in it. It's good for bragging rights. It's good for even just, friendly ribbing like this when little things come up. I've told the story before. My best man at my wedding, one of the things he did to get me was he rattled off all the names that everyone that had beat me on Fantasy Pros over the last couple of years, which no one in the crowd knew who any of those people were because wasn't a lot of fantasy players there, but I knew. I sat there. I was angry at the head table. So it was a very good dig on his part.
Oh, do you know what? I'm best man at a wedding on this Saturday coming, and I wish he was into fantasy football. He doesn't even I've just started getting into the NFL. He watched the Buccaneers win the Super Bowl, and he watched the NFC title game because he knew how important it was to me. He was like, okay, I'm going to watch it for you. But he's not really into it all that much. But he is the name of, I know he doesn't listen, so I can talk about this a little bit. He does share the name of an Olympic diver who just won gold. So my speech is going to be a little bit Olympic themed.
Okay, nice. I like it.
Yeah, so that's a little split. I just want to talk about the other type of football because the EPL starts this week, and I've never asked you this because I know we talked a little bit about the round ball with during the Euros. Do you have an EPL team that you support or kind of keep an eye on, or not really? Because a few you guys do.
I don't have one. A few years back, a bunch of guys in the score office started to get into Premier League and started to kind of pick their teams, and they were trying to, I don't know how exactly they did it, but they were trying to find teams that kind of mirrored their NFL teams. So if they liked the Raiders, they were trying to find the version of the Raiders. I think that guy started cheering for Liverpool, I believe. I'm not sure if there was, I don't know what the connection was.
That probably would have made sense a few years ago. Yeah.
When I played FIFA, I think I often played with Arsenal, but I think it was just because they were like alphabetically first on the list and their numbers were fine. I was like, yeah, okay, we'll just go with them. So I don't know. I don't know who the Bills equivalent would be, but maybe you can help me with that and I'll start rooting for them.
Bills equivalent. So you basically have to have some. Oh, this is going to sound really horrible. I'm treating you so bad as a guest. Basically, someone who's come close but never won it.
That's what it is. That really is what it
is. That's a hard one. I would say you'd almost. See, the thing is, Tottenham did win it in the 60s and haven't won it since. But I can't have you be Tottenham because we can't be friends then.
Okay.
I think maybe someone like Newcastle, where they're well known for very passionate, loyal fans,
right.
Which I know Bills Mafia is. But Bills Mafia definitely up there, one of the best 2-3.
Yeah, is there any bases. Premier League fans going through tables or anything? That would be an easy connection.
No, but what they do is it's quite cold up in Newcastle because it's up north, and they go without shirts on. So they're always there without the shirts. It's quite a
very Bills-esque.
Yeah, very much like a really close knit kind of community team. Joe Dolan supports them because I had him on and we talked about it. So you can bond with Joe. I think Newcastle will be a good bet because they don't.
All right.
They don't. The problem is they haven't really won anything for quite a long time.
I mean,
But they're quite a
that
big
is
team.
the Bills are looking good, as we know, but the
Yeah.
Bills have not won anything in quite a long time.
Well, you did
as
win
well,
a division,
so.
didn't you? So you did win a division
Well,
this
I
year.
mean, yeah, I mean, just mean the big prize.
Yeah, I think Newcastle will probably be not a bad shout. I think for the type of fans, the kind of club. I mean, the owner stinks, but he's hopefully going to be gone within a year. And maybe new owners might bring new glory. It might be a good time to support Newcastle because they're kind of just under the radar, mid-table, not overly exciting, but with new ownership could bring new hope and they could climb the table.
All right, I'll expect that Newcastle jersey in the mail then.
Yeah, done.
Or the kit. Sorry, the Newcastle kit in the mail. Got to get that right.
Yeah, we'll do that. Let's talk about, because what I want to do out of this show, because I know I've got some of your listeners listening, our listeners listening. We're in that meat of draft time. We could go over what we're seeing in camp, but I think we did a good show on that last week with Graham. We could rehash some points. You and I did a show. We talked about camp battles on your show that people can go back and listen to. I want to talk about how we can help people win titles. And I feel that this year, before we get into the main meat of it, which is on these middle round wide receivers, it's the roster construction to get to that stage. Because I think for me, I'm looking at draft boards, I'm looking at drafts this year. It's pretty hard to screw it up in the first 2 or 3 rounds, barring like you get an injury, etc. I mean, you're not going to be round 3 is very.
Well, in hindsight, we'll look back and we'll go, "Wow, we really screwed it up." But right now, when you look at it, those first couple rounds look pretty solid. Yeah,
and it's chalky, isn't it? I mean, ADP's chalky. You're not getting. You might get Najee Harris go up the board 3 or 4 picks, or you might get Joe Mixon slide 3 or 4 picks. But really, it's quite a chalky board. There's very little ADP movement, and it kind of is chalky. So round 3 is very similar. It's quite flat. It's only really rounds 4 or 5 you're getting any kind of movement. So let's talk about roster construction, both in a super flex, because I know that's the most popular format now, and a 1 QB. In order to get to, before we get to those middle rounds, how do you like to build your roster in those first 4 or 5 rounds, in both a super flex and also a 1 QB? What are some of the things you're looking for? Where do you want to potentially hedge risk, and where do you want to maybe build risk into the price, etc.? What are you looking to do at the top 4 or 5 rounds of the board?
All right. Well, for the last few years, I would say, and I don't know that it's been that, I don't know if it was like a really conscious thing as much as it was just, I was liking the rosters I came away with when I was doing this. And so I just kept doing it more and more often. And people want to call it hero RB. They want to call it elite RB, whatever you want to go with for the name. I think getting one running back early in those first couple rounds, somebody that I feel really strong about, whether you get lucky and you get a high pick and you can get a CMC, or whether, you wait into the second round and maybe you're looking more at an upside guy like Antonio Gibson, making sure that I come away with that one guy that could be my RB1 on the team, who I feel really good about, who I think has that top 5 potential at the position. That's really important. Coming away with an elite tight end has grown on me more and more over the last couple of years, just because you can't match that production. The production that you're getting from, Travis Kelce, Darren Waller, maybe to a lesser extent, George Kittle. We're not really sure what it'll look like with the target competition there this year, but I think he's still in that. The numbers you get from those guys, Kelce last year, wide receiver 3, if you look at his points per game, not even amongst tight ends. I mean, amongst tight ends, he scored like 10 more points per game than the tight end 3 last year. But if you put him against the receivers, on average, wide receiver 3, Waller as well was also in the top 10. So you can't, no matter who is going to break out later, it is going to be impossible to find guys that are going to get up into that range, right? And we could talk about the Kyle Pitts and the TJ Hawkinsons, and maybe they'll have a shot this year to get that kind of volume and be the number 1 or the number 2 option in their passing attacks. But it is going to be so hard for anyone to get up into that range. So I have even taken Kelce late first round in some drafts, depending on the format. I like the value you get with Waller, sort of end of the second, early third, if you can get him there, especially then if you are starting with one of those running backs early in the first round. And my approach with, and then after that, it's receiver. We're going receiver like crazy, right? So as long as I get that one running back early, I like to get that elite tight end, and the value at receiver that you can get in those next rounds is fantastic. And then at quarterback in single QB, if I can get one of those top 5 guys, if they fall a little bit, and I think the top 5's fairly chalky. I mean, when you're looking at Mahomes and Allen and Murray and Lamar Jackson and Dak Prescott seems like the shoulders should be okay. But if one of those 5 falls a little bit, I'll take that value. If not, what I've done forever has been grabbing a quarterback in that sort of 9 to 11 round range. And in years past, we've gotten incredibly lucky with guys like Patrick Mahomes, his breakout year, Lamar Jackson, his breakout year was a year later. We got those guys in that range. Now it's a little tougher, but you can get some of those veterans that have really high upside, like a Matthew Stafford, Ryan Tannehill, Tom Brady, guys that could have big touchdown totals, guys that have a lot of talent around them. We like their situation. I'm really happy with the teams where I get those guys. If for some reason there's great value in another position and I just decide I'm going to push back on quarterback, then I want to put together a mixture of one of the really upside rookies, the Trey Lances, the Justin Fields, with a veteran guy who maybe has a decent early season schedule. I mean, Kirk Cousins is one that kind of pops up. There's a couple that you could take a look at, depending how you feel about Sam Darnold. I know his early season schedule is like incredibly easy for them. And then expecting that you're going to have Trey Lance, whether it's week 1, whether it's week 4, whether it's middle of the season. I feel good that Trey Lance and Fields are going to get under center for the stretch run. And I think those guys offer, QB1 upside based on their rushing ability and the talent around them on those teams. So if you're talking about super flex, now we were talking a bit about this before the show because we were in a dynasty super flex league that was 12 teams. And my approach in that one was taking one quarterback early and then waiting, because I feel like some of those veterans you can get a lot later. And it's similar in redraft. A lot of those veteran guys are not as exciting, a Ryan Fitzpatrick or something. You can wait and grab them and get some value for your QB2 spot, as opposed to feeling like you got to pay up. Then I mentioned that I'm in a 14 team dynasty super flex league. And in that one, my strategy completely switched. It's also 6-point passing touchdown. So the quarterbacks are a little more important in that one. But in that one, I took the complete opposite approach, which was grabbing that first round pick. And then I traded back into the first round to get another young quarterback. So there's a lot of different approaches you could take. For me, in the redraft leagues, if we're talking about super flex, I normally will just go with that one QB early, and then I'll try to find value where it falls to me, even if it ends up meaning that I got to take chances on, if I got to wait really late and take a shot on a guy like a Sam Darnold or someone like that, I would be willing to do that just because the value that you get at the other positions when you're waiting on quarterback.
That's good to know. And I think so, summarizing that on the one QB, you're kind of thinking if you can get one of the 2 elite tight ends, you will. If not, it sounds like you'll punt the position, which makes sense.
Kittle seems to fall a little bit now, so I would still include him there. And I would look at Pitts and Hawkinson, depending on the value, like if they're going to fall. And it's tough, right? Because especially with Pitts, just the hype is outrageous, and for very good reason. I think he's going to have a great year, but that cranks his ADP up quite a bit. So maybe get Hawkinson if you can get him in the the 5th or so, a couple round discount from those other guys, where he still has a shot potentially to get up and somewhere near that range, let's say. But definitely, he's ahead of that pack that's after them. Mark Andrews as well, you could kind of talk about, but not a guy that I normally end up with too much, just because I think it's a low passing attack, it's low volume passing attack, but also they brought in a couple other guys there. It's not just going to be the Mark Andrews show. So I think that means that yardage wise, he's not going to be able to get anywhere near those other guys. And then when you look at it and go, it's really going to come down to the touchdowns for him. And we know touchdowns can be fluky. And when you have a Rashad Bateman there and they're talking up Sammy Watkins, you still have Marquise Brown. There's a lot of other options in that passing game that I don't know that Andrews is going to maybe profile, but it's some of the same things we could say about George Kittle this year, where there's, a lot of other guys there. Whereas before, when he kind of established himself, Kittle was really the clear number one. Now I start to look at it and go, that might be Brandon Ayuk pretty soon. Deebo Samuel is going to take some work there as well. So Kittle's not the only show in town anymore.
No, I don't think he is. I cannot draft Kittle. For me, when I build my roster in the opening 5 rounds, I don't really want to bake in too much risk, because I know that where I will win leagues is value later on, where I'll pick apart and find players that others won't and get value on them. And I back myself to do that and run the waiver wire with smart decisions. So I kind of want to build my roster in the first 4 or 5 rounds. I don't want to say entirely floor based, but I want to kind of avoid an unnecessary risk. And I just view Kittle too much as an unnecessary risk at that stage of the draft. If it was later on, I'd probably be okay with it.
I said it on our show recently, but I know we're all saying that, and I feel that way, like I'm talking about too. But there is also part of me that thinks that Kittle might just come back and us going, oh yeah, right, he very well is the best tight end in the league, and how on earth did we even question that, right? There is a possibility that he comes back and we're reminded very quickly just how good Kittle is. And that can happen with a lot of injured players, right? We see that often when these guys have injuries. Saquon Barkley could be another one where people are worried about the injury. It's in the news a lot right now. And you don't remember, exactly what he was doing prior to that injury because he was gone almost all of last year. And then he could come back, and he is that guy that really, when he's healthy, could put up those CMC type numbers and maybe even finish as the RB1 overall. And if you miss him for the first week, or, he's sort of limited in that first week or two, by week 3, week 4, definitely by the middle of the season, you all of a sudden have that guy that is that league winner that can put up those massive CMC like totals, and you got him at a discount, maybe in the second round or so. I've seen some people even say he's fallen to the third, but I got him in a super flex. It was a best ball league, but I got him at the end of the second round recently. And it was an industry draft. So that's a guy where, like I said, if I got to take those first couple weeks and I don't have him, but the value that you're going to get for the rest of the time is definitely something to look at. So don't always, I know sometimes people just want to shy away completely from injured players, and I get it. There's guys right now that I like a Curtis Samuel, where he's missing this time. He's got this groin injury. It's sort of unclear when he's going to be back. Now you start to worry because you have a new team, a new quarterback that he's got to get used to, and he's not getting those valuable reps. And he has this injury where they're saying, well, maybe he'll be back for the final preseason game. We're not totally sure. Now's the time to start worrying about that I still like him. I like the town. I like the situation, but that's one where I would be worried about drafting him. Whereas some of these other guys, the Barkleys, the Kittles, they're such elite talents that they're going to come back. And I think we're going to get reminded pretty quickly just how good they are.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not overly worried about Curtis Samuel. I'm not getting a ton of him, but where he is falling in the right range, then I'm okay with it because he knows that system anyway. It's not like he's walking into a brand new situation. He knows the play caller. He knows the playbook to a degree, or at least a good majority of it. He's not someone that needs to be engrossed like a rookie. Barkley, 100%, you're right. They're saying, now it's probably likely he doesn't come back to week 3 in full participation. So he's either going to be, like you say, on the limit or not play at all. And that will drop him into the late second, third round. And I think you're right there. He's a value because you can always batter through the first 2 weeks with, players like JD McKissick will get enough volume to just kind of get you through if you build the value elsewhere, etc. Like you can always find someone that will just get you through a couple of weeks.
For sure.
So I'm with you on that. But so just last thing on your roster construction, picking apart on a 1 QB, it sounds like your ideal. Appreciate what different per draft spot would be: 1 running back, 1 tight end, 1 elite quarterback, 2 wide receivers. If that was like in theory, in a 1
in
QB,
Superflex or 1 QB,
or both potentially.
In 1 QB, if I could get, and I'm probably not going to end up with one of those top 5 guys because I'm not willing to take them. I want to see them fall, like I said, right? Like they're going to have to fall to the 6th or the 7th for me to be interested. Okay. So that's why I don't end up with a ton of those guys. But yeah, grabbing that 1 running back early, grabbing an elite tight end in those first 2-3 rounds, and then hitting receiver very hard. And then if you can get that quarterback sort of, in the 6th or 7th there, great. If not, we're just going to hit receiver and running back like crazy in there. And there's lots of interesting running backs as well that are a little further down. Some of them are rookies where people aren't sure of, what their role is going to be. Some of them are guys that just are 1 injury away. There's a lot of guys that have significant ceilings that you can get in that range that I feel pretty good about. And then I have my starters at every position except for quarterback. I have a couple depth guys. And then now I grab that quarterback in the 9th, 10th, 11th round. And I still get a guy that, Tom Brady that could put up another 40 touchdown season. Matt Stafford, who I think his ceiling goes up with the Rams and that situation and Sean McVay, or Tannehill, who really the worry with Tannehill has been that he's been so efficient, and how on earth can he continue this efficiency? And you lose Corey Davis and you lose Jonnu Smith and you go, okay, well, now we're going to see he's not going to be as efficient. And then you add Julio Jones. And it's like, okay, well,
he'll be fine.
As long as Julio stays healthy, he's going to be just fine. And he's got the rushing ability as well that everybody's looking for. So Tannehill is one that very sneakily could maybe get up into that top 5 or top 6 if everybody stays healthy in that offense.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. And I think it's a good point to remember that I wrote about this in the book. I think if you can get one of those elite guys around what round 5, round 6, I think if you can do it, depending on how your build's going, if you feel comfortable doing it, because I think they give you an edge. But yeah, I'm taking ones in round 7, 8, unless you're getting like a Wilson to fall in that range, then no, I'm with you. I punt it until you get that next tier of guys, the Brady, the Tannehills. They're the kind of guys you want to target. So, and it goes back to my point at the beginning. So I think for me, where not leagues will be won or lost, because obviously you've got a whole season, you've got a waiver wire, but where I think the first quarter of the season is going to be played out in fantasy leagues to get it off to a good start is that rounds 5, 6 through 9, that range. And because there's so much wide receiver depth, it's a minefield. I think you have to really, if you get that right, I think you're going to be off to a flyer and you'll have an amazing team that will challenge for titles. If you get it wrong and you pick too many mediocre, very low floor or safe floor, but no upside kind of plays, you're just going to plod along, maybe scrape into the playoffs, and you'll run out of juice. So let's try and work this minefield together, because I think this is where, for me, we can win people leagues this year, just on this. And I'm going to refer back to this episode a lot. So kind of broken this down. I used I used Fantasy Data's PPR data for ADP. So I tend to find it's pretty live. They update that every week or so. And it's kind of broken down. So most of it's pretty consistent in a super flex or a 2 QB league. It's wide receiver 13 down to wide receiver 38 is in that range. So that's Evans, Julio, Woods, Amari Cooper, and Cooper Kupp are in there. And it kind of ends with AB and Robbie Anderson. Whereas in PPR, 1 QB, it's wide receiver 18. So it's Chris Godwin down to Jarvis Landry at wide receiver 44. So it's 26 wide receivers in that range of 60 picks. I want to go through round by round and not talk about each guy, but let's talk about maybe one guy, maybe 2, that we think could outperform ADP and people should think about targeting, and maybe someone there that is a red flag that we should consider. Be a bit careful. There's other guys in that range who I would take over the others. So round 5,
I'm just trying to drill in my head not to talk about every guy, because I know I feel whenever this stuff comes up, I feel like I want to talk about every guy, and then
we can see how we get on. I don't mind talking about.
I'll try to keep it as tight as possible.
We're all right. So we've got Chris Godwin, Michael Thomas, Adam Thielen, Deontay Johnson, DJ Moore, and Tyler Lockett. They're the 5th round guys right now. Lockett's been moving up in drafts because he was a late 6th round guy, and he's getting some love. Thomas, obviously, with the injury, he's dropping down. In that range, if you were on the board right now thinking, I'm going to go wide receiver here at 501, 502, and those are on the board, whose number are you calling there? And why do you think they're a good bet to potentially?
Well, I'll say first, I mean, Thomas almost completely off my draft board, like as close as you could be. Like I have him outside the top 50. I think I even have him outside the top 60 receivers last time I did my rankings update. And it's not just because the injury and the uncertainty around that, but as we're seeing today, he's posting stuff on social media. There's clearly a giant rift there. It was last year. There was talk about it that maybe he would get traded and he didn't. And this just reminds me so much now of whether it be AJ Green near the end with the Bengals, whether it was Kenny Golladay last year, these receivers that end up unhappy with the team for whatever reason. And Thomas, it's not money, it's something else is going on there, but unhappy with the team for whatever reason. They don't want to be there, or the team doesn't want them or something. and he's got this injury, and all of a sudden maybe we get to midseason and now that injury is lingering, or we saw, right? AJ Green he didn't want to come back to the Bengals, sat out a whole season basically. Kenny Golladay didn't come back last. Like, these injuries can just go on and kind of be the impetus for them to then decide that I'm going to stay out a little longer than maybe, actually needed. I'm going to need more time to rehab. I don't want to come. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I just have a hard time holding Thomas because of all those things. And because he's just eating up that roster spot. If you can get him and throw him on IR, maybe, but I don't want him sitting on my bench, just eating that roster spot early in the season that I could spend grabbing, exciting waiver wire guys, or, all of a sudden that running back gets injured. You want to go get that backup running back who could be a starter in your lineup, but instead you're waiting on Michael Thomas, who may or may not come back in week 5, week 8, week, whatever, right? Like, you don't know when he's going to show up. So
sidebar on that, While
Sorry?
I've got you, sidebar on that, while I've got you on this topic, I get asked this probably 3 times a week at the moment. Where would you take Michael Thomas? Right now, if you had a draft board in front of you and you could put a pin to say, I'll take Michael Thomas there, where's the line?
I don't think I would. I honestly don't think I would.
Any point.
Like I said, I have him at wide. I'm pretty sure he's outside the top 60 receivers last time I did it. And it even kind of surprised me. And then I looked at it and I was like, yeah, I don't really think I want him above any of those other guys that are there. Like, and it seems kind of shocking. Now, it also speaks to the depth at receiver that, you can get these guys that are fairly deep that could maybe step up and be a wide receiver 3 in your lineup. And would you rather have that than Michael Thomas that you're waiting on forever? So yeah, right now, unless we get some sort of news that changes, and I'd hate to say a player's off my draft board completely, but I would have a very hard time taking him in redraft leagues anywhere. Just because I think you can get a more valuable player. I think there's better ways to use that roster spot. And I'm not so sure that the upside is there. What if we see Marcus Callaway is getting a lot of hype? What if we see him come out and play pretty well? And, Michael Thomas comes back eventually, but if the offense has been doing all right, on top of the fact that we don't know what's going on with the quarterback situation and how the offense is going to look, there's just so many question marks. Anyway, we weren't going to talk forever about each one, so I'll keep moving.
No. I just asked because I took Michael Thomas in the draft recently in the 12th round, and then stuck him on IR and then picked up Callaway.
Okay, so if you have the 12th round and an IR spot, I'm okay with that. Like, then you're not burning that roster spot. Yeah, I'm okay with that. And that could work out for you in the second half of the season. You get that bump going into the playoffs.
A 12th round pick.
All right, yeah. Outside of the first, 10 rounds, and if you have an IR spot, I can get on board with that. But I'm saying there is a chance you get nothing from that pick. But at that point in the draft, there's a chance you get nothing from any of those picks. So.
Exactly. Cool. So Thomas is the one.
All right, back to the 5th round here.
So we got
that's definitely that was an obvious one. I hate to speak positively about the Bucs, especially after what you were saying about the Bills and kind of digging that knife in as well early in the show. But Chris Godwin, it really surprises me that people are fading him as much as they are. And I get it. It's crowded there. Antonio Brown, Mike Evans, you got Gronk, you got all these different pass catching weapons. You got depth. You got Jalen Dart. You got all these guys. But like I said earlier, we were talking about quarterbacks. I think Brady's going to have another good year. I don't think there's really any reason that we should be concerned. I know the cliff is coming. And even though, Tom Brady seems like he's superhuman, that at some point we're going to have that Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, it's going to go away. He's going to lose it. And that cliff can come very quickly. But I don't think it's going to come this year based on what we saw last season. I don't think it's going to come yet. And I think he is very smart about what he's capable of. And I don't think Brady is going to put him, Peyton Manning was that guy that lived and breathed football, and a guy that maybe didn't want to go away, right? Didn't want to leave the game. And Brady, I think, will leave the game when he's ready. I just think he knows his body right now and he can still produce. And he's on this very set. He thinks he's going to do 2 more years. And so I think the passing attack in Tampa is going to continue to be really strong. When people want to say that it's Antonio Brown's there and you have Mike Evans already, and that's going to be a problem for Godwin. Let's look at a couple things. One, Godwin was banged up last year. He played hurt a whole bunch. Even in the games, if you just take the games in the second half of the season when Antonio Brown was there, you look at it and you take Godwin's numbers and you put him on pace for a whole 16-game season, he would have had over 1,100 yards and 10 touchdowns. Like, he was still producing 15.9 fantasy points per game last year. He was continuing to put up decent numbers. The 15.9 fantasy points per game was 15th at the position. Like, even though those other guys were there, he was still producing. This is a guy that we're a year removed from him finishing as the wide receiver 2 overall. And yet he has one season with some injuries. He is still young. He's 25 years old. I don't get why all of a sudden the fantasy community is kind of looking at him and not as excited about him. So Godwin is somebody that I would be very pumped to get there, who I think could get right back up and put up wide receiver one numbers. And I just think that people are too quick to look at some of these pairings, some of these competitions and say, well, there's a winner and a clear loser. I think all three of those Bucs receivers are great picks on your team. I know Antonio Brown probably represents the most value because where he's going, but I would love to have Evans or Godwin on my team as well. So I think he is a great one. And Tyler Lockett, you mentioned, it's another one where it's like surprising that fantasy managers aren't as excited. And you look at like, what is the concern other than the fact that the Seahawks coaching staff just seems like they love running the football. And they consistently, the end of the season, Pete Carroll came out and said, we got to get back to running the football. And they bring in a new offensive coordinator. You don't initially know how that's going to go. But right now, I'm starting to warm up on that passing attack just a little bit because it sounds like they're going to up the tempo. And if they up the tempo, they could still go run heavy. But if they're upping the tempo, there will be enough volume for that receiving game to continue. When you look at Lockett, I mean, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, 28 touchdowns total over his last 3 years. You know, you look at a guy like that who, you know, had 100 catches last season. Like, why on earth would you shy away from that guy? He's definitely somebody that's on my list that I would love to have on my team. You know, and there's other guys other than Thomas was an obvious one, but you look at that list and I mean, Adam Thielen on the wrong side of 30, the touchdown regression's coming. I keep saying this stat, but over his last 25 games, he's been held under 60 yards 17 of those 25 games. Like, he's an older player. There are other younger options on that team. You talk about Jefferson, Dalvin Cook gets involved in the passing attack. Irv Smith, I think, is somebody that's still kind of interesting. I know people were worried because Mike Zimmer came out and said his role wasn't going to increase, but even the role that he had when Rudolph went out last season, Irv Smith was putting up pretty good numbers, top 10 fantasy tight end numbers. He's going to be involved around the red zone. So unless Thielen could put up another huge touchdown season, and it's possible, but he is a very touchdown dependent wide receiver and a guy that just at this point in his career, compared to some of those other names, I'm shying away from him in that range.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think if Thielen was around later, I'd be more interested in the fifth. I find it difficult. Lockett, I'm with you. Not only that, just who's his competition for targets? He's not got any. He's got a great rapport, as you say, with Wilson. He's got no competition for targets. He's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah,
DJ Moore,
him and DK all the way. You're not going to have an Eskridge or somebody come up and steal work from Lockett. So you have a very concentrated passing attack there. I think Gerald Everett will be involved, but I don't think Gerald Everett's coming in to get, you know, elite volume amongst tight ends. Like, he's going to come in and fill the role that they've always had there, whether it was Jimmy Graham or Will Disley before he got hurt. So yeah, I think, you know, both those Seahawks receivers, and you know this because I took DK Metcalf in our Dynasty League in our startup a month or so ago. I'm warming up to that Seahawks passing attack, even though I had some concerns. The rushing thing, the second half of the season, the last 2 years, they kind of just fell off the map. A little bit of hope more recently, some of the things I've read about how Shane Waldron's going to change that offense and up the tempo a little bit. Just a little more excited about it.
I think so. The one I will always go for in that range is always Deontay Johnson. I just think he is a crazily underrated receiver with what he's been able to produce there. You know, you looked at him last year, and again, I don't think Juju is a big thing in that offense. I think they bought him back because he was cheap. They worked out a deal, but Juju's not going to be there next year. Juju's not going to take another discount to stay there. And they don't have the money to pay him next year. I don't think he's going to be there. I think he is a luxury that they've managed to afford to have for another year. And it suits all parties. Juju must think he can do better than what he did last year. And maybe he can. Yeah, there's worries with Roethlisberger and how long he's going to hold up. But, you know, I don't think Roethlisberger was overly fit last year. And Johnson was still good. I think Johnson is going to put up big numbers this year. When I look at that range of players, I think about who's the guy who I can see getting into the wide receiver one conversation. You mentioned Godwin. I'm a little bit conservative on that because of where the part of the field he's going to compete with targets is going to be a little crowded. I think he'll do fine. Like, I think he returns the ADP, but I don't see top 6, top 8 wide receivers. I think Deontay Johnson, of all of those players, is the one that, with a little bit of additional volume and a little bit to go his way, could finish up there. That's the one.
The only
for me.
thing I worry about, I worry about the offense not being as pass heavy, just because Ben's arm can't continue to do that, it seems like. And we're talking about quarterbacks nearing the end. I think Roethlisberger seems like someone that's a little closer to the end there. And so how much are they going to lean on the new, running back with Najee Harris there and try to pound the ball a little bit? And then also, if I was just betting on which guy was going to break out in that receiving core, I think I would put my money on Chase Claypool being the one that takes that DK Metcalf kind of leap, just being that physical freak, and him kind of coming in and blowing up a little more and maybe taking just a little bit of shine off of Deontay Johnson. But talent wise, we saw him get a ton of volume last year. Whether some of that was making up for the fact that they didn't really have a rushing attack. So they were kind of doing like the, Jarvis Landry, Miami Dolphins thing where the short passing game kind of becomes your rushing attack. But yeah, I like Deontay Johnson as a player. I just think the only real dart that I've been throwing in that Steelers passing attack has been Claypool, for the reason that you're saying almost, is that I see Claypool guy that, if it all comes together, could all of a sudden in a couple months, we're talking about him as a top 10, top 12 receiver, just based on what we saw last year and kind of how that projects and his profile when you compare it to some of the other players that did what he did as a rookie.
Yeah, I love Claypool as well. And I think both of those guys, if you think that offense sustained 3 top 24 wide receivers last year, and I think Juju will go arrow down. And I think as a result, both those guys, if they pick up a little bit, Harris gets his share, you never know. All right, let's move on to round 6. Got Chase, Ayuk, OBJ, Golladay, Higgins, and then Claypool, who we've just talked about. So obviously Claypool is someone here who's a good value, who we think can outplay the ADP. I think we've both got on board with that. Who is the one you're most worried about in that range? And then who's the one other than Claypool that you would be buying?
Well, no offense to OBJ, who has done some great things and for my teams, or to Kenny Golladay, but OBJ coming off the torn ACL, and just, he no longer gets the kind of volume that he got when he was in New York. Like, that's just what it comes down to at this point. He was being peppered with targets in New York. They're not going to do that in Cleveland. And we kind of knew it from the outset, like the offense that they're running and lean on the rushing attack. They have a great offensive line. They got a really scary defense. They made some great additions on that defense. They are not going to air it out and throw to Beckham 10 times a game. It's not going to happen. So he'll have the blow up performances like he had against the Cowboys last year. It will happen from time to time, but you just can't expect the same ceiling from him anymore. So now you got to look at him, adjust your expectations. He is more of a wide receiver 3, maybe has some wide receiver 2 upside, but that name appeal alone is going to push him up draft boards, I think. And that's why, I don't have a lot of shares of him. Golladay, on top of the fact that he was going to the Giants and starting with a new team, receivers changing teams, sometimes that could be problematic. Now he's injured. He's not going to have those valuable preseason reps with Daniel Jones. That is a significant worry in my mind, on top of the fact that, now he comes back, and what does that offense look like? We haven't exactly heard great things about Daniel Jones in training camp. I'm a little worried that he's not the answer. So Golladay is another one there that I just haven't ended up much with. And then, all right, the problem is, like I said, I can't just talk about one if we're going to talk about the guys that I like, because like Brandon Ayuk, absolutely in love with him. T. Higgins, I think is still fantastic. What we saw from him last year. I know Chase is there, and I like Chase too. I like all the young guys pretty much in this range. And then Claypool. All of these guys are guys that I'm very confident in a year, in 6 months, we're going to be looking at these guys much higher up wide receiver rankings than they are right now in redraft leagues. So, when you look at them, Sam Wallace of Rotoviz, I jotted this down because I think it was probably the best way to kind of bring all these guys together. He pointed out that since 2010, 17 receivers have scored at least 200 PPR fantasy points in their rookie seasons. Claypool made that list. He made it, but it was a per game basis because he didn't play the full season. So he would have made it if you put him on pace the whole year. And then T. Higgins came up just short of the 200. He was at like 196 or something like that. And when you look at the names that were on this list of guys that did that as rookies, OBJ, Michael Thomas, Mike Evans, Keenan Allen, AJ Brown, Amari Cooper, Julio, Tyreek Hill. Like those were some of the names. Really, I think everybody except for, I think Kelvin Benjamin was on the list, and I think Jordan Matthews was on the list. I think those are the only two that didn't go on to have like completely successful careers, just slam dunk, obvious fantasy starters. So all three of those guys are guys I'm very excited about their futures. I want them everywhere in Dynasty. And I think it's the kind of thing where they're going to pop up and, very quickly shoot up draft boards, shoot up our rankings. Yeah. Just really excited about the situations for all of them. And Higgins is the one that I could see people looking at and going, well, Chase is there to be the number one guy. The volume that they're going to have in that passing attack is going to allow 2, maybe 3 receivers to be successful. And Higgins has, double-digit touchdown upside. So yeah, I'm very, very excited about that range. That's a round where I really want to come away with one of those guys.
Shall I just give you some breaking news? Because it's literally happened. Well, so
oh,
it's not
no.
news. No, it's not news. It's breaking training camp buzz.
Okay.
Jamar Chase is not showing as much separation as hoped.
Oh, okay. All right. That is very surprising. And also, okay, I'm going to rant about something quick here. The overreactions that we're getting, and we could tie this into the Joe Burrow thing. You're getting me fired up now. All right. Joe Burrow coming off a torn ACL. The guy has a few rough practices where he's a little worried about the knee. And it seemed like Twitter was like, oh, Joe Burrow's a bust. His career's over. What are we talking about? The guy's coming back from a torn ACL. Of course, he's going to be a little rusty early in practices. Like the guy still has 4 or 5 weeks before the season here to get ready. And we're like already writing off his career pretty much, right? Like it's just, and Jamar Chase is a good example of, he's a rookie. Does he have a profile that makes him look like he's going to be an elite receiver? Yes. Does that mean he's guaranteed to be an elite receiver? No. But also, let's give the guy a little time. Last year at this time, we weren't looking at Justin Jefferson as a 1,400-yard receiver. People were looking at him going, well, he can't even pass Olabisi Johnson on the depth chart, and he had COVID, or he was on the COVID list, so he missed some training camp time, and that's going to set him by. And I'm saying that, I'm not a hypocrite. I'm sure I was saying that too, because logically it made sense. And then he came out and proved us totally wrong. So you have to come at this stuff with some context, with some nuance. I know everybody wants to boil things down to make it as simple as possible and make it just black and white, but there is always context and nuance in these situations. And you got to look at some of these guys and go, yeah, there's a reason why we have training camp and preseason, why players are ramping up, and why a quarterback coming off a torn ACL is going to be a little rusty, or why a star rookie receiver, potentially isn't just going to show up at camp and dominate everybody. It might take him a little time to figure it out. And a guy that didn't play last year either, right? Like, anyway, that gets me so mad sometimes on Twitter when I see people that just make these really hot takes and want to overreact to everything. And it's just like, everybody's just got to simmer down. I don't go Aaron Rodgers and tell everybody to relax, but like, just come at it from a very logical perspective, think the whole thing through, and then figure out what you want to do with it. Don't overreact to one news item.
Yeah.
I'm saying that as a guy who just talked up T. Higgins, and for what I just said, probably would be a good thing if Chase struggled a little bit at the start, but I don't think that's going to happen for very long.
I normally just completely scroll past these things. It's just because we were just talking about Jamar Chase and it literally popped up on the screen as breaking. I was like, I have that.
You had me worried that somebody tore an ACL or something. I know, you said that. My face probably dropped on camera. Yeah.
I might have to screen grab that.
Yeah. Well, considering I lost Cam Akers in that dynasty startup like a week after the draft. Yeah. Yeah. Third round pick gone.
Yeah. Just throw that one in the bin. Pick it up next year. Round 7. Jerry Jeudy.
How can we top that last round first of all?
We can't, especially not with this round, because this round doesn't overly excite me all that much. Jerry Jeudy, Devonta Smith, Cortland Sutton. That's it. That's all that's going. Because I think this is the round where people are getting those tight ends. People are getting running backs. There's a lot of running backs going around 7 on the board. So not many wide receivers here. But you obviously got the 2 Denver boys, and people can't obviously decide where to put the money on. And Devonta Smith in Philly.
Yeah, and I hope that this isn't because I'm kind of more in that dynasty mindset right now, because we had our draft and I'm in another startup right now and I've been doing a lot of dynasty stuff. But Jerry Jeudy for me is the one that stands out here. And I know he had the terrible catch rate under 50% last year. awful, and he dealt with some drops, and he dealt with drops in college, and that was a concern coming out. But I think we can attribute a lot of that to bad quarterback play. I really think that that's a safe bet based on what we saw there last year. And I think it's going to improve either because Drew Lock wins the competition and, he kind of got challenged by Teddy and he comes away and maybe he is a little better this year, or because Drew Lock's the same player and they decide to go with the more, steady option, the steady vet, and go with Bridgewater, who we saw in Carolina can support some fantasy receivers. He had 3 guys up in the top 25 when you talk about DJ Moore and Anderson and Samuel last season. So Judy, you can't just trust, one opinion, one beat writer, one teammate, one coach talking them up. But with Judy, it's basically like everybody surrounding the team is saying that he's just flashing, great route runner, obviously. And a guy that's, really coming on. That last season, I didn't think it was too bad. He didn't do what Justin Jefferson did, but he came out, had over 800 yards. So I think he's a guy that's on a fine trajectory here, especially when you look at the quarterback play probably improving. Because when you look at last season, I mean, he was bottom in the league when you're talking about accurate passes thrown his direction. Pro Football Focus had the stat. Judy was right down there by the bottom, and it's understandable. It wasn't just Drew Lock's fault. They had a bunch of other quarterbacks cycling through there. So
Kendall Hinton.
Kendall Hinton. He didn't throw many passes that game, but yeah, Kendall Hinton was out there. And then Cortland Sutton, a little bit worried, coming back from the ACL injury. I think, he's going to improve again. People freaked out. That was another one where he was out there running around, didn't really look like he was himself. But the guy's got 4 or 5 weeks here before the season to heal up and get a little more confident in that leg. So, and then the other thing with this, if you're looking at that Broncos receiving core, last year, Tim Patrick came in and kind of did like a, 80%, 70% Cortland Sutton impression. Like he got 79 targets. He had some big games. I know every week on our podcast and the Waiver Wire show, I kept saying, how is Tim Patrick still available? Go and pick him up. So you get 79 targets vacated from him. I mean, he'll still get some, but that he's not going to be a starter anymore. You're going to have Cortland Sutton in that role. And then Deshaun Hamilton no longer with the team. He had 44 targets last year. So there's some targets that could go Sutton's way without really impacting Judy that much. And then at that point, all you really need is Judy's catch rate to come up. And like I said, I think that's going to happen. So I would look at those 2 Denver guys, and I would have Judy as the one that I think is rising, is ascending. And I think Cortland Sutton's one that I'm probably shying away from. I still think he's going to be good, and I'll maybe look at him a little more next year, or maybe try to trade for him during the season if he starts slow. But a guy that in the draft, I don't think I'm going to take in that range.
I'm with you. Judy, potentially, Smith and Sutton, not for me in redraft. Because the next round for me, there is some guys I would have over, I think most, if not all of the guys in the previous round. DJ Chark, Juju, Curtis Samuel, who we've mentioned, Robbie Anderson, who, by the way, if he's available in the 8th round and I'm picking, he's coming in straight away. I think of all the receivers that we've talked about, he is the one, other than the guys maybe in round 5 and Ayuk, that excite me the most. AB's in that range. I went on your podcast and talked about how he's just a ridiculous value in there. He was a round 9 guy there, so people are buying him. He's jumped into round 8. And Chenault, who I don't want any of on any. He will not be on any of my. He will not be on any of my teams. I've just watched too much Urban Meyer football as a Florida Gator in my time to know that they're not going to support 3. And I appreciate college games completely different, but I've seen this spread offense. I've watched enough of it. I just don't want any part of Chenault. I just don't think Chenault's his absolute ceiling is what he did last year. I think long term, maybe. Long term, in a dynasty league, I would be inclined to pick him late if he was still there. He probably won't be. This year in redraft, I cannot see where his value is going to be. They bought in Marvin Jones. Marvin Jones is going to have a solid role this year. You've got Chark in that range. Chark's role will be baked in. And then, so Chenault's going to play, and who's going to eat into his volume? It's going to be Etienne, because Etienne is going to be there. That's why they drafted him in the first round. They didn't need a running back to go ahead and carry the rock. They needed one to do these spread plays out of the backfield. And I think that's where, for me, Chenault is. I look at every wide receiver on this list. I think out of all the wide receivers in my rankings, I probably have Chenault at the bottom. Yeah, in fact, I do. I don't have any one of these wide receivers below Chenault. I just think Chenault is a guy who could he for me is the Henry Ruggs of this year. He's the guy that is going to.
The one thing that makes me, I mean, aside from training and OTAs, obviously they were talking about he was, the best player in the field, the best skill position guy on the team, all that sort of stuff. So that you were getting kind of that big drum beat from a lot of beat writers and people around the team. So that was kind of interesting. But also when I look back to him coming out, and I did it not long ago, I went back and looked at like my pre-draft profile for all the receivers. I normally do an article each year looking at who's going to be the kind of biggest star, who's got the best chance to kind of be a star at the next level before we know the landing spot. And I didn't have him in the same group as Lamb and Judy, those guys at the top. But I wrote in that article that it was just because of his durability, that he is a guy that really, in my mind, projected like he could be very strong receiver at the next level, be a team's number one. But because he was so banged up in college, you just had a hard time going, is he going to make that transition to the pros? And I know that could be a very dangerous thing when you're kind of guessing at some of that injury stuff and maybe it doesn't carry over. But I think now what we're hearing from them, and Darrell Bevell, the offensive coordinator, he said they're looking at him as more of a traditional wide receiver this year. They want to play him more on the outside. DJ Shark, having to have surgery on his finger, that is going to only help Chenault. Like that's only going to help get him more looks and more practice time and all of that, and maybe push Shark a little down people's boards. I think Marvin Jones is going to be involved and probably more involved than we want him to be, and maybe not the greatest fantasy option, but a guy that could take away from some of the options there. And I'm with you that Travis Etienne, everything is pointing to him getting a lot of work as a receiver, as a runner. They're going to have him involved, and he could be problematic too. And maybe the move here, and I had Pat Fitzmaurice on my show, and we were doing the quarterback preview episode, and he talked about Trevor Lawrence being a guy that he thinks is a great value and a guy who could help lead people to fantasy titles, because you look at all the weapons that you have on that offense, and if you're not sure about who to go with the quarterback, and then you kind of expose yourself to all of them, right? So I actually do like Chenault. I understand the concerns with him, but I think for me, I think some people look at him and see him as more of that gadget guy, or the guy who could have played this slasher role that they're going to put Etienne in kind of. Maybe that Chenault could have done that, but I think he could be more than that. I think he's a very strong receiver, like physically strong body guy, a guy that can get involved in, you can give him handoffs out of the backfield. You can find different ways to get the ball into his hands, and he could pick up some big yak ability. So he's actually a guy that I do like in that range, on top of Antonio Brown, who we mentioned and talked about earlier. Don't need to get into him again. And Anderson, who quietly had over 1,000 yards last year. And I know Terrace Marshall's going to be good. I know DJ Moore's there, but I think you're going to get at least one decent season here out of Anderson, and then he'll be able to pass the torch to Marshall. And even if Marshall does come on, you have Curtis Samuel out of the picture. It's not a 1-for-1. You're not going to have Marshall come in and play the role that Samuel played, but he's a guy that can come in and be a big slot receiver for you and just kind of soak up some of those Samuel targets. And you could still have Moore and Anderson put up decent numbers. So where you get him, he's a guy that I've passed on a couple of times. I like him, but I passed on a couple of times, including in our dynasty startup, and went with a younger option in Curtis Samuel. And it was just between those two. And I regretted it, probably a round later, I was looking at it going, I probably should have went the other way. I let the age thing sway me too much, because Samuel's like 4 years younger, but, and I'm sure the injury now makes it look a little worse, but Anderson, a guy that I wish I had even more places than I do.
Anderson is just, for me, Carolina last year, and appreciate last year there was no CMC there, but they led the league in 3 wide receiver sets. I expect him to do something similar with what Joe Brady does. I expect him to use Marshall. I see Marshall more this year to get his roll up and to get him comfortable. You might see him in that like hybrid slot kind of role. That's how I can kind of see his usage for this year. And I agree with you. For next year, then I think Robbie Anderson is a one and, well, I say one and done. He did it last year, so he's a 2 and done for me. But I think this year, I think that's how they'll get Marshall. Carolina are under absolutely no pressure to win now. They're not going to win the division. They're not going to win 10 games this year. They're going to be competitive. They were competitive last year. They lost, I think, the most one-score games out of everyone in the league last year. They'll be competitive. They'll be tough, and they'll fight every week. But I think this year they're thinking, how do we develop for next year? And I think putting
Yep.
Marshall in that sort of slot, I'd like, by the way, Marshall for me is an instant late round wide receiver guy who I'm just adding
Yeah,
everywhere. I'm
very
not going to be able to
interesting.
do that
Yeah.
anymore. I've been
If
picking
one of
him
those other
since-
receivers goes down, yeah, he's a guy that could definitely blow up. And we talked about the easy early season schedule, and this has nothing to do with our subject today, but I'm going to throw it out there because it's something I came across recently. Last year in the second half of the season, the Panthers defense actually started to put up some decent numbers. I think they were in the top 10 fantasy points per game among defenses. They got a lot of young guys. They've only added to that. And you look at the schedule early in the season. So if you're really waiting on defense, you look at that schedule early in the season, and it's the Jets in week 1, the Saints in their quarterback situation in week 2, the Texans in week 3. They also have like the Eagles in week 5, like the Giants, Atlanta. Like that first half of the season is pretty good for them. And I think that's a defense that could really surprise people with these younger talents. And they've spent a lot of draft capital on that defense. Now these guys getting a little older. Makes them pretty exciting too. So totally off topic, but I felt like I should throw that in there.
Love that bit of extra value. Well, we're helping people win leagues, so don't draft the defense. Use that extra pick on someone like a Marshall. Get to a week before the season, pick up the Carolina defense, play them for the first 3 weeks of the season. There you go. Last one, then. Let's look at round 9, because this is for me, I think, probably the most difficult of the receivers to kind of separate out. Pittman, Boyd, Williams, Cooks, Hardman, and Landry. Because there's no one in there that I think is, for round 9, there's no one in there I think, oh, God, I don't really want them on my team. I mean, like, nobody loves Jarvis Landry. No one ever goes out there thinking, I'm going to go into a fantasy draft and I'm going to draft Jarvis Landry. But you know what? In round 9, thinking he's a low-end wide receiver 2 guy if it all kind of happens for him like it did last year. I don't love Beckham, it, but...
With Beckham back, I think that hurts Landry in the same way that, it hurts Beckham, obviously. So he's not one that I'm looking at there. But yeah, there's a lot of interesting guys there. And I would be really okay taking anybody else from that list. I mean, Pittman's not as exciting based on the Carson Wentz injury. So that kind of lowers the offense initially in the season when Wentz is out. But now that hurts all that time they would have had together, right? New quarterback to get ready for the season, get on the same page and help Wentz maybe knock off some of that rust or forget some of those bad memories that happened in Philly and maybe remember how to play quarterback. Now they're not going to have that time leading into the season. And then you don't know when is it going to be when that team is kind of rolling and everyone's comfortable and gelling together, because there's also injuries in the offensive line. And so, some concerns about that passing attack for the Colts and maybe a slow first half of the season for them.
It's going to be worse when they get Nick Foles in. It's going to happen.
Oh, it's not. There's no way that they can do that to Carson Wentz. Of course
it's going to happen. The money makes sense. It would cost like a conditional 7th or 6th round pick.
It was funny when Foles was like basically in the press conference, like calling for it. Like, yeah, I love that system. And obviously you just wanted it to happen. But yeah, if you look at some of these other guys in this range, Mike Williams, already showed us that double-digit touchdown upside. Now you're going to have him attached to Herbert out there in an offense that they're suggesting that he's going to play that X spot and he's going to get a lot of targets. So that makes him kind of interesting. Cooks is somebody that, when you look at Brandon Cooks and what he's done over the last stretch here, like, I don't really want to invest in Texans players. I really don't. No. We don't know what's going to happen with the quarterback situation there. And it doesn't seem like Watson's going to play for them this year and all that sort of stuff. But you talk about a guy that's the clear number 1 on that team, that last year when Will Fuller was out, Cook saw at least 8 targets in each game. So it was 4 games where Fuller was out. So that's pretty good volume. I remember last year being stunned that they were giving that kind of volume to Cooks because he doesn't profile like a high volume guy, but he was producing. And 5 of the last 6 seasons, he's broken 1,000 yards. Like there's a lot of reasons to like him. And talk about quiet years, quiet stat lines. I mean, 81 catches, 1,150 yards and 6 touchdowns last season for Brandon Cooks. Now, Deshaun Watson was there. It's, not as ideal of a situation this year, but when you're getting him in this range, I would take a shot on him. So yeah, he's somebody else. I mean, Hardman, we're finally getting, and we could get burned again, but we're finally getting that buzz that the team is kind of excited about him, that, maybe he is kind of getting a little more comfortable, more than just being that little gadget guy that, he can do more in that offense. And then the other thing I like about him is he comes with sort of that nuclear option too, right? That if Tyreek Hill goes down, and last week Tyreek Hill missed a couple of practices, and there was, oh my God, if he goes down and if Hill misses significant time, Hardman just slips right into that role, and he's not going to give you Tyreek Hill numbers, but he could put up huge stats as a potential number one in that offense. So yeah, a lot of paths to really nice outcomes for that group too. And it just shows you that receiver is so deep. But one of the things that I noticed, and I think it was probably evident during the show, and that's why I brought up the dynasty bias, and I hope that's not what's impacting it, but having confidence in some of these younger guys who we haven't seen do it yet, but we really like the profile. We've seen them flash, and just don't think that the draft values and the ADPs, that's not how it's going to stay all season long. You got to think ahead to, halfway through the season, what is this going to look like? If this guy comes out and does what I think he can do, is he going to be a wide receiver 1 this year when everybody else thinks he's a wide receiver 3? And you don't need to pay up wide receiver 1 prices to get him, but just thinking all that stuff through and not just looking at ADPs and trying to necessarily get the value off of that, but forming your own opinion about what this is going to look like halfway through the season or after this season, and trying to get ahead of that stuff and get some of those players that are going to be the difference makers that we're going to look back on and say, man, how did we not see that coming? You got to try to figure that stuff out in advance.
And what's really interesting through this discussion, because we have talked about almost every single player, the ones that we're saying are risks here. So that's Thomas, Thielen, OBJ, Golladay. These are all players who at one point in their career produced, but they're all age profile, a little bit older, all have some form of injury concern or have come off some form of injury, and into situations that are either ambiguous or they're just not high volume. And so we're worried about that. And the guys that we're really excited about are ones that are young, got high draft capital, have been invested in by their teams quite significantly, and most of them by the coaching staff that are there. So they've drafted these guys. So people like Ayuk, Judy, Hardman, and Anderson was signed by this coaching staff, and he's probably the exception in terms of age wise. But I'm looking at this thinking, if you're kind of stuck between Jonathan Johnson, Chase Claypool, they're examples of guys, younger guys drafted by their franchises, drafted by the coaching staff to come in and do a job. I guess to navigate this minefield, if you're stuck between someone on a little bit older or someone that with that high draft capital, young guy, not saying always, but that seems to be how we've gone through this minefield. Look at the age profile, look at the draft capital, look at the situation they're in, and think, can this guy give me more than where he's going? Because I'm looking at all these young guys thinking Ayuk can easily outperform, Chase can outperform, Higgins can outperform, Judy can outperform where he's being drafted. We're not really saying that about Thielen, about Golladay, about OBJ, about Landry. So yeah,
and there's value to be had everywhere, and we got to keep reiterating it. Like, we're not saying you only go for the younger players, and
absolutely not. No.
There's definitely value with some of the older guys as well, and of course it's case by case basis. But if you're looking and you're trying to get ahead of those guys that could take major leaps, and if we're looking at that upside, and especially in the middle rounds, and we're trying to find those guys that could jump way up and not just be, and I always talk about this with running back too, right? Like, I don't want that safe guy that can give me some points and just get me by. And those guys end up being roster cloggers. You want the guy that can come in and grab that backfield, whether it might need an injury to do it, but that can all of a sudden be that running back 1 and get a ton of volume and make a huge difference for your team. And if you're picking receivers in the middle rounds, you don't want that guy that's going to go out there and just give you okay production. And you want a guy that can significantly outproduce, and that you're going to know early in the season what you have with them. And then you can move on and pick up that waiver wire receiver that's blowing up in the first few weeks instead, if it's not working out for your guy. So yeah, just making sure that you're constantly focused on the guys who could be difference makers on your team, and not just trying to fill a need at a position. Oh, I need a RB2 that I can just throw in there, and you get some safe guy that really just doesn't have a ceiling whatsoever. That normally for me, that on my teams, it's just going to make me upset and tank my team, because I'm not going to have that power to kind of win week in and week out. You're not going to have that fuel to power your team.
No, they're the kind of guys you pick up off the waiver wire for a week. I've got an injury here. I've got a bye week. I just want to get, like Naeem Hines. Naeem Hines wasn't a guy that anybody was going out and drafting last year. But you know what? For a couple of weeks production here or there, and I know he finished as an RB2, but I'm not being funny. I probably would have finished as an RB4 if I'd lined up enough games. With the
Phillip
amount of
Rivers would
injuries
have
there were
thrown you the
last year.
ball just as much, I'm sure. Yeah.
Exactly that. So, you know, I just think that, those are the sorts of guys that you don't really want to draft. They're the kind of guys that you want to have, you know, earmarked to pick up off, like, for example, I would draft a JD McKissick or a Naheem Hines if I was going for that Barkley, knowing he's not going to be playing for a couple of weeks. I think, okay, fine. You're going to take one of those guys because you're going to have him plugged in for a very specific role, for a very specific set of 1 or 2 games, and then you're probably going to cut him. That kind of makes sense. But the rest of the time, I think, no, just go chase league winners. If you miss, guess what? There's a whole waiver wire full of guys. No one was drafting James Robinson last year. No one was drafting Mike Davis last year. These guys are always going to pick up, and you just either need to try and outsmart them and try and get them. Some really smart guys were getting James Robinson in the last round of drafts. They were getting James Conner in drafts when a holdout situation with Lev Bell was happening. Take a chance on maybe one of these free agents. You've got the Rams who could easily go out and get it back. And if Henderson gets injured, like he has done the last couple of years, and you've picked the right back, buy a lottery ticket into that backfield and you'd be laughing.
Yeah, and I know I know we're getting close to the end here, but the other thing that I will say, because we talked a little bit about everything, right? We've talked about kind of how we're approaching drafts and that strategy, and then the players in those middle rounds that we think are important. The other thing I will say is think about your actual roster construction. So if you are investing in an elite tight end, don't take another tight end. Don't go, okay, well, I got Kelsey early, but I love this. Irv Smith is good. No, you don't need another tight end at that point. Use that roster spot to try to make up those other positions. If you go receiver early, you probably don't need to carry as many receivers on your team then, because you have those elite guys that you feel good about, right? Or if you do go running back early, then you might not need to spend all those bench spots on the backups. You could try to take more shots on some of these receivers we've talked about to try to find more of those guys who have those ceilings that could get into your lineup and give you, difference making production. So keep that in mind, because I think sometimes in drafts, people just go through and they get too hung up on value, or, you got to think about that roster construction all the way through and how important that can be. And that's why I said earlier with quarterbacks, if I take that elite quarterback early, I'm not taking a backup, but if I'm going to wait until late, then I will take that rookie and pair them with the vet, because now I feel like I need both of those to try to make up that production. So roster construction is something that's incredibly important in all of this as well.
It's such a great point, because the amount of rosters I see, and I've just gone through, a load of drafts, and I'm in a lot of drafts, and I see this, the amount of people that they go and draft 2 quarterbacks, 2 tight ends, 1 kicker, 1 DST, 5 running backs, 5 receivers. You'd be amazed at how many people do that. And you think, actually, you're just throwing away picks doing that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying don't do that. There are times where that is the appropriate strategy. You've gone quarterback late and you do what you say. You partner Trey Lance with, Kirk Cousins, for example. Yeah. That makes sense. Right? Absolutely. Doesn't, that's why you carry two quarterbacks. You've punted tight end to the 10th round and you get Higbee and an Everett. Makes sense. You bang on one of those guys. But as you say, if you've got Kelsey, don't draft another tight end. Just pick one up in the waiver wire week. You're going to get an injury. You're going to get someone go off your roster. Just rotate out.
Because if Kelsey gets hurt, you're probably screwed anyway. Let's face it. If you're losing that elite tight end that you spent a first rounder on, your season's probably not going to go as you planned anyway, and you're going to be scrounging. So don't burn that roster spot just in case that happens.
I keep saying this to people. If you go running back 3 of the first 5 rounds, which happens quite a lot for people, you should really, unless you're getting extreme value somewhere, you should probably stop at 4. And I mean, don't get me wrong, if someone falls into your lap, I'm not saying that's a hard and fast rule, but for me, I'm kind of, if I'm getting 3 in the first 5 rounds, that's the way that the board's gone, and that's how I like the value. And then I'm going to go into this wide receiver minefield and pick my guys there. Fine. I will stop at 4 unless I just see an extreme value that I think, oh, wow, Tony Pollard's there in the 14th round. All right, I'm going to have to pick him, because if Zeke goes down, then fine. But if not, just stay with 4. You're fine.
Yeah, makes sense.
And go with the extra wide receivers because you need. Love the advice. This has been a lot of fun. I always love having you on.
For sure.
I've learned a lot. I think everyone's learned a lot. I think people are gonna do well out of this episode. I think we've picked through a lot of wide receivers here, and we've given people a good plan to walk away and hopefully do well in their drafts and crush them. But where can everyone find the amazing draft kit you put together? Because that's the other winning piece now. They need to get your draft kit. They need to be accessing that, looking at your projections, looking at your rankings, looking at what you're doing, because that's also going to help a lot of people win. I've had so many people message me today when they heard you were on, saying, "Yeah, Boone's helped me win leagues." So, where can all my listeners tune in and get that content?
Well, I love to hear that. I know every time that you and I talk is we're probably going to run long as we're doing today, always. So that's not a surprise whatsoever. And I love talking to you too. And that's why I feel like we could keep going on here for hours and hours. That's why we kept taking so many detours along the way. Our draft kit's available on the Score. You can download the Score app. It is free. There are a lot of awesome outlets that have draft kits that charge you for them. And I'm not saying not to do that. All I'm saying is I would put my rankings up against anybody's in the industry in terms of accuracy, and the Score is still giving them away for free in that draft kit on top of my breakouts and busts and strength of schedule. And there's really everything you need in that draft kit. It's designed to work on a mobile app. Really all the content's kind of made for that. So you can have kind of your phone just there really quick checking during your draft. All of that is what we have in mind. So I would say check it out and bookmark that page, because we're going to continue to update it. Offensive line rankings are coming soon. Lots of stuff here. I'll have my strategy articles that I do every year, looking at where you're picking in the round and what kind of strategy you could take along the way with some of the players that I would pick in those spots to kind of help guide people through. And I know a lot of people like those articles. I get a lot of people asking where they are, but I don't put them out in July because so much changes. So we try to put them out in early to mid-August here, so that we know kind of some of the injuries at least that could change things along the way. But I constantly update everything in that draft kit too. The rankings are getting updated all the time. So check that out. Check out the Score Fantasy Football Podcast. That's my show. We're doing the season preview series. And one of the things I did was this year for each position group, I tried to go and get the person. I didn't just try, I got them, the person who was most accurate ranking that position last year. So we had Pat Fitzmaurice, who won the contest last year and was the most accurate at quarterbacks. We had Jared Smola. He was on for the running back episode. I'm going to have Sean Kerner on this week, who's been one of my rivals for a long time. He's always up near the top of the rankings list as well. His first time on the show, so I can't wait to talk to him. He'll be on for receivers, and then Chris Raybon doing tight ends. So that's going to be a ton of fun. I love those episodes. And I think similar to this one, just a lot of information. We're trying to give you actionable information for your drafts, for your leagues. They're going to help you win a fantasy title, because that's what we want. We want everybody to win the fantasy title, or at least get you as close as possible. And that's what we're here for. That's why we're grinding and going over the stuff over and over and spending all this time for so many months of the year. I'm just glad now I'm getting to do it full time. So I can help justify all the time that I'm spending on this more than when I was doing it on top of my regular job before. So yeah, it's fantastic. I love talking to you. I'm glad we were able to do this. And I'm glad we had you on the show a couple of weeks ago as well. People should go back and check out that episode if they haven't already.
Yeah, I really appreciate the kind words. I'm going to leave you one more bit of training camp hype.
Oh, you get me worried again.
No, don't. Joe Judge has said that Saquon Barkley can theoretically play in preseason.
So along those lines, we had Dr. Edwin Porras on the show talking about injuries a few weeks back. And he sort of suggested that he thought Barkley was maybe a little more ready than they were letting on. And that from what he saw, he thought Barkley was going to be okay early in the season. Now, there was more news that came out since that show, but he seemed pretty confident that we weren't as worried about Barkley. And he showed more concern about somebody like Joe Burrow, which like a few days or a week later came to fruition when everybody was freaking out about Joe Burrow. But at the same time, it's not that Joe Burrow is going to fall off the face of the earth. It's that early in the season, we're not going to see him running as much as he did last year. You know, there might be a little bit of rust to knock off because he didn't get to spend as much time all off season getting ready as he would normally because he was coming back from the injury. So there was a lot of information in that one. I recommend people could check that out too. If you're worried about some of these players that have injuries early in the season, we talked about everybody from Cam Akers' future to when you could expect Michael Thomas to come back. Yeah, lots of stuff in there. And that's also in the draft kit.
Nah, appreciate that. I just love the comment was theoretically can play in the preseason because
everything is theoretical.
I mean, theoretically.
Joe Judge makes some interesting decisions, though. We can Yeah, I make some interesting decisions, but
let's end this here. Justin, thanks as always for coming on. Really appreciate it. I think people got a lot smarter this week listening to this. I know I have, and I was part of the discussion. So, Rush Nation, don't forget listener leagues. Links are in the show notes, but also on the website. Go sign up if you haven't got a spot. We are asking for a small charitable donation. If you are joining, it's £3, about $5 US. Help us get to that goal of $5,000. We're just £1,000 away now, so not far to go. Don't forget to tune into all the other guys. There's great shows lined up this week. But until next week, don't forget, keep rushing.